The most memorable thing a student has ever said to you?
So it's something very funny, and one of the things my one of my students asked me was, "So, Miss Jaffrey, when you started teaching, did you really want to do it, or just are you doing it for the money?"
I think to be able to mold your kid in the way, in the background they come from, really helps them a lot, right?
I also have a question about the word molding when we say we mold our kids or we shape our kids. Um, because they are born with a very concrete personality. I feel we are more like gardeners, not sculptors. There's a very specific way for boys to be, and showing emotions is definitely not one of them. Yet, when they grow up into adults and parents, we suddenly want them to magically have these nurturing um, dispositions for their children.
When you use that term man up, and I've still not been able to figure out as a man, what does that even mean?
Exactly. What does it mean?
What does man up mean? If you could have lunch with any educator, past or present, who would it be and why?
I would have lunch with this.
How would you define success in education?
I put a lot of value in.
Early childhood education is the spark that lights the flame of lifelong learning, creating a brighter and more equitable world for everyone.
Look for the silver lining whenever a cloud appears in the blue.
Hello and welcome to Between Us. Make every conversation count. Today, we're going to talk about education, early childhood education, and this is a part of our education series. And in this episode, we have with us Aliya Jafri. She's a professional learning coach, founder of Pangea Learning Without Borders. And as she introduces herself as a lifelong learner, she has amazing global experiences and which has fueled her mission to ensure that every child receives not just education, but high quality, engaging, and personalized learning experience. Aliya, thank you for being on the show.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
All right, Aliya, so we begin with our first segment, What Matters. I want to start off with Pangea, if I get that pronunciation right. It's Pangea. Um, Learning Without Borders focuses on coaching teachers and enhancing classroom practices. What are the most critical skills you require, um, you know, to effectively support children's education?
So, when you say I require, is that what you mean by what you
No,
require,
not
or
what you require, but
teachers require?
teachers
What?
require. Yeah, I'm talking more from a process standpoint.
I feel empathy is probably the first understanding that we need to proceed from.
Mhm,
We all want to live in a world that's a little bit more empathetic
mhm,
than we found it,
mhm,
and we many times teaching, I feel, is one of the very few professions where you hire people who were not trained in that profession, and you actively do that. And so how do we support our teachers?
mhm,
And in some instances, I feel that it's actually wonderful to see these young graduates, young adults coming into the field of education, because they're so full of ideas. They brought their current education, their learning, to this job, and they're open to trying out different ideas, new ideas.
mhm,
So really approaching something with openness, with curiosity, and with empathy,
mhm,
with while embodying a learner spirit. So we talk about teaching and learning, and we have to be learners first before we are teachers. If we are not capable of learning and constantly reevaluating ourselves, our biases, the way we look at things, the baggage that we bring into a classroom
mhm,
based on how we were educated, we will not be effective teachers. So, really being open
mhm,
and ready to learn new things. And I feel education is more like a feedback loop where you observe,
mhm.
and your education has to build in what you have observed. So almost like you empathize, you do some needs analysis, and then you provide what you feel your stakeholders need.
Mhm.
And then that cycle is a more positive cycle of meeting the needs and moving forward.
How do you ensure that these coaching which you provide to the educators, how do you ensure that they ultimately come back with tangible results in the classroom? Is there, do you have a matrix, or do you have a measurement process or anything of that sort?
It's hard to quantify that way, but because it's such a people's and connection based profession.
Hmm.
But I feel that if during our workshops, during our learning sessions, we actually practice. So we always talk about theory, but we immerse ourselves into theory and we say, wow, what a wonderful idea. I hadn't thought about it. I'm going to go back and take this into my classroom.
Hmm.
But when it comes to actually applying those ideas, we do not know how to do that.
Hmm.
So the how has to be built into your workshop, your learning sessions,
Hmm.
because that's when you're going to be able to tease out what you understood, what you need more in-depth research in, what you need to tease out a little bit more, and what are the questions that you still have,
Hmm.
and what are some things that you're not able to get to. So the how part has to be part of your workshop, or at least that's what I ensure.
Hmm.
And then that constant connection, because professional development is an ongoing learning process. You can't just go to one session and say, okay, I've learned it all and I'm not going to apply it in my classroom.
Hmm.
uh, 15 things If 15 things were discussed in a workshop, you're maybe able to take two and then apply maybe half of it in the classroom.
Hmm.
But if it's ongoing, then you set goals and you say, okay, I'm going to work on this and then I'm going to work on that. And if you are connected with whoever your agency is, whoever your organization is that you have a relationship of professional development with, then you make sure that there is a constant feedback, constant monitoring, supervision, as well as communication and discussion sessions. And I tried this, but this is what I found out, because that's what leads to disappointment, burnout, that you're constantly trying some things, but you don't know how
Hmm.
I can tweak it, how I can make it applicable to my own context, because everything I'm going to say may not be, or actually will not be, applicable to who your students are. So everything needs to be tweaked based on who your students are, who you are serving.
Hmm.
And sometimes we give up because it's too hard, because it's not translating as we thought it would.
Hmm.
So that constant connection with however you're learning is very, very important. So ongoing collaborative learning is the key, in my opinion.
Okay. Uh, Taking a step back, if you could share a little bit more about learning without borders, and what it means to you personally, and I think it's the need of the hour. I think I wish uh, each one of us were a little bit more educated. And when I use the word education, I think people tend to look at it from going to a school and acquiring a degree, but I don't think that's what it really is, right? So if you could share a little bit about that.
So if you're talking specifically about my consultancy, Pangea Learning Without Borders,
Yeah.
it actually it came into being during COVID times.
Mm-hmm.
So that by itself was how we were learning, how we were communicating with people.
Mm-hmm.
We were sitting in one place, but speaking to our families, our loved ones, our students across borders
Mm-hmm.
online
Mm-hmm.
through different learning platforms or digital platforms. So that was a very obvious way
Mm-hmm.
of naming it, Without Borders. But also, borders, we create so many borders, which are artificially constructed in our minds.
Mm-hmm.
And because our brain seeks patterns and likes to segregate things, that's how we have tried to make sense of the world. But honestly, there are no real borders in the world. I can go across from one city to another without realizing that there was a border.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing with disciplines. There is in life there is no time for math, and now I'm going to focus on only speaking, and now I'm only going to write, and now I'm only going to do a science experiment. Life is integrated.
mm,
Even when we go for grocery shopping, you are adding up the prices, you are matching it with your grocery list, you are estimating how much of this is going to serve how many people. Oh, this element is not, or this ingredient is not available. What can I substitute it with?
mm,
So nothing is really in a box in real life.
mm,
So the way we teach in our schools, for the ease of teaching, we have divided into subject areas
mm,
and periods, but really uh, it happens across all disciplines. So again, without borders means that we're not teaching your science separately from your language arts,
mhm,
and your social studies separate from your outdoor time. So all of this has to be integrated in a way that makes more sense, because many children feel, why am I learning this? How is it going to help me in my life?
mm,
How is it applicable to me?
mm,
So when we break down those borders, again, borders of, I'm dyslexic, I have ADD, I have this, so these are again labels and words that we have created
mm.
for the ease of serving, but it ends up that we just see that person, that child, that learner as a label, and not necessarily as a full person.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, that's interesting. Um, I guess borders are also has a lot to do with our own internal mindset. I think the way we look at things, correct? Um,
Absolutely.
let's now get into student agency and personalized learning. If you could talk us through the concept of student agency in depth, if it's possible, and why do you feel it's pertinent and important for a child development? And how do you think it can be fostered in the early childhood education?
Okay. So one thing that I feel is important to think about is not just student agency, but learner agency.
Hmm.
And because that, within that heading or category, we fall as well. But if we say student agency, some teachers may not see themselves as students, but I hope all of us, human beings, see ourselves as learners.
Right.
So I would really talk more about learner agency.
Okay.
So again, the principle that it falls under is that we are more productive, more connected, more empathetic when we have any say and control
Hmm.
in what we learn and how we learn.
Okay.
Correct.
Hmm.
So if we have a say in it, whether we are teachers, so in terms of professional development, I need to say, this is what I'm struggling with when I work with my students.
Hmm.
This is what I want to learn more about, versus just attending a workshop that's about something that I have no personal connection to.
Hmm.
Because my school is doing a training, I have to sit in it,
Hmm.
and so I can check off the number of professional development hours that I have to receive.
Hmm.
Same thing goes with students.
Hmm.
They have to really see that they are valued, because that's one of the basic needs of human beings, to belong and to be loved. And children are naturally very, very curious. They put everything in their mouths when they're babies. They're exploring the world.
Hmm.
And they start to assert themselves and who they are and what their personalities are from a very early age. So nurturing that is really, really important.
Okay.
And, and again, student agency is not something for us to give. It's a right that they're born with.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Why do you feel it's essential for young learners?
Because think about our own early experiences,
Hmm.
early childhood education, and again, that term itself has various meanings. But if you think about uh, preschool or kindergarten, children go into school with so many desires, so many aspirations. They want to learn and explore things. That's where the attitude towards world, towards life, develop. And if that world is constantly shutting them up, asking them to follow a very strict procedure, and telling them to sit and listen to somebody, who is going to be happy in that?
Hmm.
Neither adults nor children. Yet when children feel that this is a place for me to experiment,
Hmm.
for me to test out my ideas, you're developing that sense of agency, that sense of problem solving and critical thinking, that I can manage certain outcomes. I can pursue a question till I get some kind of an answer.
Mm-hmm.
And not for the sake of assessment, not because somebody requires me to do it, because I'm intrinsically curious and I want to know what happens
Mm-hmm.
if I throw this cup down.
Mm-hmm.
And some cups may bounce back, some may make one sound. If it's a metallic cup, it'll make a different sound. If it's ceramic, it's going to break. So again, all of these are testing hypotheses, and we may see that as uh, undesirable behavior, but in a child's mind, they're testing things.
True.
And we have to make sure that that world is open to them, where they can test their ideas, their hypotheses, so they can so their life is based on their own experiences, and not things that have been told to them. If you do this, this is going to happen.
Mhm. Interesting. And how do you think educators can actually balance the need for a structured learning with the flexibility that is required to honor each child's unique learning path?
And that is very difficult, because depending on where in the world you're talking about, and in fact not even where in the world, which school you're talking about, because within each city there's so many different models of education, different kinds of school. We have government schools which have 50 students in one classroom and one teacher, and then there are private schools which may have 25 students to two teachers, or some even 3-to-1 ratio.
Mm-hmm.
So depending on what kind of learning environment we're talking about, um, it's easier or harder to develop that environment. and and again, it goes back to what is sustainable, what is doable, and how can I create that environment, because what will work in a government school is very different from what may work in a private school, or even in a government school with fewer even fewer resources.
Another interesting, and this is something which is very close to my heart, is when you talk about cultural sensitivity, in especially in early childhood education. And since you've worked with in different countries, cultures, um, how do you ensure that early childhood education is culturally responsive and inclusive?
You know, I think it is really important when the child enters the learning space outside of their home, because their home is a learning space as well. When they enter a school environment, they are represented. When they see books, they see faces that look like theirs. They see skin color that looks like theirs, hair kind that looks like theirs. A lot of us grew up reading books that were from different cultures, English books, for instance, or British books, so to speak. And as interesting as those books were, I never felt that I was the main character. I did not see myself represented in those characters. So it is really important that the child sees themselves reflected in the classroom environment. The languages that they speak at home and in their social environment is somehow present in their learning environment. It's validated, because so many times, we're all products of a colonial times. Even though we did not live during colonial times, it's almost been part of our DNA. We
Yeah,
we have a preference for speaking English. That is not our national language. Maybe it is for you guys, but for me, it may be the official language, but it's not my mother tongue. But English is a language of power. But so again, breaking down those power structures and saying your regional language is just as powerful for younger children, reading them stories in their language, singing songs in their language, because when you listen to lullabies and songs and oral stories at bedtime, that's what really gives you an understanding, not just of the language structure
mhm,
of your mother tongue. You hear the cadence, you get familiarized with the pattern, the meter of the sounds of your language. And your sense of poetry and rhyme and rhythm is also developed in those very early years. You may not understand the words. How many of us remember songs from our childhood where we do not understand the words, and we still say some of those words incorrectly because that's how we heard them as children?
true.
And but it is embedded in us because it develops those very early skills of uh, understanding the meter and the cadence, and our world of our understanding of the world is developed through those stories.
Hmm.
And so if there is a character in the story that looks like us, or like our grandmother, or like my bhaiya, then we feel that these stories are about us, and we see ourselves as protagonists, not just of the stories but our own lives.
It's so true, because uh, here in India too, there's this, I would say, I don't know if it's correct, but insane pressure to put your kids into English medium schools. They speak the language. I can see some changes happening now, but the reality of the matter is that when the same story, which is being told to me in English, when my grandma used to share that with me in the language we speak at home, with specific examples, cultural references, it's so much more easier for me to remember. And it's interesting because yesterday I put up a reel on my Instagram. We're starting off a storytelling series, and I actually mentioned that I've heard the same stories from you know five different people, but when my the same story was narrated to me by my grandmom, it had a deeper impact because of the way she presented it, the language and she presented it. I think that matters. In fact, I think you are the expert here, but I think when it comes to early education, a lot has to do with even the parents' education. It has a lot to do with you know uh, the financial condition of the family, and so on and so forth. When we look at that, and I think to be able to mold your kid in the way, in the background they come from, really helps them a lot, right?
Yeah, and I also, not to put you on the spot here, but I also have a question about the world molding when we say we mold our kids or we shape our kids, um, because they are born with a very concrete personality, and we can only shape the environment around them,
Yeah.
and we can facilitate certain access to things. But I feel we are more like gardeners, not sculptors,
Mhm.
where the tree is growing, the plant is growing. They take their nurturing from nature and from their DNA, how they were wired to be. They're not a block of stone where I am carving out every single aspect of their life. And so in that, if you're looking at an analogy, I would use more of that of a tree, and teachers or parents as gardeners
Yeah,
who nurture the environment.
true. But I also feel that a lot has to also do with the background you come from. And when I say background, it has nothing to do with the social status, but more to do with, I grew up, me and my sibling, we both grew up with very progressive thinking um, parents, because they both came from families where they were all academicians and educators. So, my classmates, some of them I could relate to, and some of them I could not, in the way we connected. I think it has a lot to do with, because I think school, especially when it comes to early education, school is just one part of it. Where you grow up, the
Absolutely.
parents around you, your neighbors, your community. I think all of them matters a lot. So yeah, just a thought. You know the best, so I'm just sharing my thought.
No, and no one person knows the best. I think it's the community that raises a child, and all those elements that influence a child are equally important.
Yeah, and I think growing up, when you have and I grew up in a joint family, so for me that helped a
Mhm.
lot, because I grew up with a lot of cousins, uncles and aunts. So you know uh, you you also learn how to get around, how to get your things done, and the
Absolutely.
different perspectives you learn from every individual. It's just a um, all enough of my growing up. But what role do you think cultural identity play in a child's early development? And do you think educators can really create a learning environment uh, that celebrates and honors their diverse cultural background? Is that even possible?
Absolutely, it is possible, and I think everything that we talked about in the previous question about the child being represented in their language being integrated in the classroom, the stories being read out to them in their classroom, then of course you can't. Um, the teacher may have a limitation. I cannot speak every single language that is spoken in my classroom. I was working in a school for immigrants and refugees in the U.S., where there were 25 languages spoken in the school and 19 in my own classroom. And obviously, I do not speak 19 languages, but how, while I cannot personally speak those languages, how do you celebrate those cultures? How leveraging parents? They are such strong allies, and how can we invite parents into our learning community? Because what you said earlier, there's a term in Urdu which is called talim or tarbiyat.
Mm.
So it's not only talim, it's not only education, it's also and tarbiyat. I do not know if there is a word that captures that meaning in English. It's nurturing, it's upbringing,
Mhm,
but it's all of that and more.
mhm.
And that's what comes from family and friends and everyone that you grew up with.
Yeah,
They were not educating
when
it
you
you
said
in traditional way.
when you said tarbiyat, does that mean parvarish?
Yes, yes, and also it has to do with how you enter a space.
Mhm,
How do you sit? How do you um, listen to in a poetry recital, for instance, or a music recital? How do you carry yourself or conduct yourself?
yeah.
So many things, that are part of that upbringing of how to be, procedures of engagement,
No, but
which
you,
is
you, you,
slightly different from education.
but you have to share with me 19 different languages. How did you go about doing it? I mean, I know parents as allies make a huge difference, but even then, as a teacher, how did that whole experience uh, come across for you?
So, because I was teaching an older grade, I was teaching third, fourth, and fifth grades,
Mhm,
or working, and later on, I was working as the IB coordinator and the academic coach through kindergarten
mhm,
and fifth grade. Really, we also had teaching assistants who represented 9 different countries and were hired because they were refugees. That was part of the school's charter,
mhm,
and so they brought that experience as well as their language skills. And again, while I could teach some of my students in Hindi, for instance, or I did not speak all the other languages yet. Celebrating their cultures, because many times, again, in the U.S., when my own children were in elementary school, December was somehow looked at the time where you talked about world holidays because everybody felt that they had to celebrate Christmas, but you cannot celebrate Christmas unless you talk about 2 or 3 other token holidays that are also represented by different communities. Yet you cannot possibly integrate or know about every single celebration or culture that is represented in your classroom. And I feel, why try to do that, by researching? Why don't you invite those who are experts in that culture
mhm,
and ask them, what is it that's important to you and your family? What are some things that you celebrate and you observe, and how can we integrate that into our classroom? So bring them in instead of me trying to create something which may not be authentic, bringing the first hand perspective into the classroom
mhm.
and having them share what is it to be a person from Somalia or from Myanmar or from Iraq. So let them speak for themselves instead of me distilling down and diluting whatever it may have been.
Fascinating. This conversation is making me go down memory lane. A lot of things which I used to experience growing up. How do you think? And you mentioned that parents and teachers are perfect allies when it comes to you know. How do you think they can uh, collaborate or work together to foster um, emotional intelligence and resilience within children?
I honestly feel an early childhood environment that is developmentally appropriate, that is research based, that is is grounded in student agency
Mm-hmm.
is a perfect environment for developing social and emotional skills and resilience through play, through active engagement, and through experimentation. Because that and though the same kind of hands-on experiential learning needs to take place throughout, because we at some point feel, okay, children are now too old to play in kindergarten, they need to put the toys away, and now they need to study, that now they need to really focus on concepts. We forget that we build our concepts, we don't and I'm also part of a product of a education system where we had to memorize things and cram things, without understanding. We always read about these experiments with the Bunsen burner and the ball and chain expansion without ever doing it myself. So you all your information is theoretical. So how do you bring that experiential learning? Because we know the joy that doing things on your own that answer some of your questions bring to
Yeah,
us.
yeah,
And that's how early childhood classrooms are set up, where children are exploring and discovering their world and making sense of it through their perception and through play. Because if you think about play,
mm-hmm.
even if it was unstructured play um, in in your neighborhood street,
Mm-hmm.
think about all the lessons that were learned through that. Think about how you had to negotiate your turn, how you had to make sure that you also got to bat, and you were not always the one who got handed the least desirable role in the play. Nobody wanted to play with somebody who always wanted to have the turn or who always wanted to win. So you always had to learn to negotiate.
Sure.
And if you always burst out in anger because you wanted to win, nobody again would be interested in playing with you.
Mm-hmm.
So self-regulation, turn taking, all of that is learned through play. And that's the first thing that we throw out of the classroom.
Mm-hmm.
And and talking about emotional intelligence, um, we sort of vacillate between being very stoic about emotions and not showing our emotions.
Mm-hmm.
And I just feel there's a lot of pressure on young boys because culturally we still feel that boys should not do this, should not do that. There's a very specific way for boys to be, and showing emotions is definitely not one of them. Yet, when they grow up into adults and parents, we suddenly want them to magically have these nurturing um, uh, dispositions for their children.
Mm-hmm.
Yet none of those were encouraged as they were growing up. So that emotional vocabulary is missing
Absolutely. So true.
from their upbringing. For little girls, we would say, "Oh, I see that you're upset. Why are you crying?" Or "Why are you? I see that you're upset." We do not always ask the same question of our boys.
Mm-hmm.
We
We,
always want them to man up and
yeah.
to stop crying because crying is for girls. We have these stereotypic notions of how to be a young girl and how to be a young boy.
Mm-hmm.
And in today's world where um, gender norms are changing,
Mm-hmm.
you know and even what a gender is something up for discussion, and it's constantly evolving. We have to really work on how do we express ourselves in a um, in a way that we understand ourselves, because if we are not able to sift through our own emotions or understand what is it that I'm feeling right now, I'm not able to communicate that effectively. And I and I would just carry that on into my teens, and we know in teens, emotions are running high anyway. So I think all of this work in early childhood education, where we are building community, where we're a culture of acceptance and meeting each other's needs and belonging,
Mm-hmm.
that those needs are affirmed, are validated, and we learn to integrate those and we normalize feeling angry, feeling disappointed, feeling jealous, feeling left out. All of those emotions have to be named and voiced and talked about.
Yeah, I.
Only then are we able to feel, okay, yes, it is normal for me to feel this way.
Mhm. And I think in today's world, as we have started to discuss and ask important questions around gender and the role of gender. And I think when you use that term "man up," and I've still not been able to figure out as a man what does that even mean. What,
Exactly. What does it mean?
what does "man up" mean? You know,
Exactly.
yeah, and it's like if you go back to some of these movies from across the globe, you will hear this word, you know, "man up." Come on, I mean, what?
Exactly.
How do we?
What does it mean?
Yes, exactly. Um, I do want to ask another questions around this.
Yes.
Is what are some of the early indicators, Alia, when it comes to mental health challenges amongst young children? Because you actually work with them, and do you think educators can intervene effectively to provide the support?
Um, I think to some extent, yes.
Hmm.
In some severe cases, we need to go to the experts because we do not have every single expertise. So we need to realize what is it that we can do,
Hmm.
and when do we need to call in the experts and document that these are certain things that I'm noticing, and I need support. I need help
Hmm.
in uh, in addressing those needs.
Hmm.
Because as whether you talk about Maslow's hierarchy of needs or you talk about choice theory, every behavior is a kind of communication.
Hmm.
So when the child is acting in a certain way, or even when adults are acting in a certain way, they're actually communicating a need
Hmm.
which is not being met or is being met.
Hmm.
So if you look at it in this through this lens, through this model, that they're communicating something, and it is our job to understand what is it that they're communicating. Are we able to meet that need or not? So yes, it is possible, but again, they have to feel that they belong. Love and belonging is the first thing. Of course, basic needs are the first thing, and there are many countries in the world, many um, schools in the same country
Hmm.
where children do not come to school with basic needs met. They do not always have 3 square meals in the day. They have not had a good night's sleep. Some schools serve children who wake up very very early, work, and then come to school.
Yeah.
So, are their basic needs being met? So, yes, to some extent, if we build our community, a sense of community, and understand our, again, entering the space of empathy and valuing children for who they are, because we have such a strong understanding of this is what I need to teach the
Hmm.
students. And we as teachers often have an agenda, a curriculum, something that has been given to us either by our school or the government at different levels.
Hmm.
This is what I have to teach. But if we do not connect with our students first, if we do not create a sense of community, they are not going to learn from us.
Absolutely, absolutely. The reason why I asked you this question is, I've had a school counseling psychologist uh, on my show, and we were discussing how schools have mandatory counseling psychologists, but the ratio is still a lot to be desired. But my take is that even before you bring in a psychologist, at the end of the day, I think the earliest indicators are you know deduced by the educator who's actually in the classroom first before you go back and share it with the rest of the team that the kid needs help. And that was the reason why I asked you this question um, around mental health. And taking forward from what you just said, um, play-based learning and its impact on the cognitive development of a kid. um, Question to you is, what are some innovative strategies to integrate play into a rigorous academic curriculum without actually compromising on the outcomes, the learning outcomes, the educational outcome?
This is very difficult. It's I wish I could say this is very easy, that you have to do A, B, and C, and then you have it.
Mm-hmm.
It is not so easy because again, we are bound by the curriculums that have been given to us. We as teachers are um, judged or evaluated based on the results of our classrooms, and those results are based on the curriculum or the exams that are the students have to take. So while I can teach in complete freedom in an ideal world, it's not going to always be show up in the results that my principal is going to look at.
mm, mm,
Yet, I also know from experience that if you really teach on a conceptual level,
mhm,
you do children end up developing the skills that will make them more successful in their exams, in their classrooms, because they will be engaged in an authentic way. I can give you one example. While I was teaching in an elementary school, the students were required to take several standardized tests.
mhm,
And one year, they changed the curriculum for the science test,
mhm,
but our county chose not to change the curriculum but stick to the old curriculum.
mhm,
So the test was going to be on the new curriculum, yet we were required to still teach the old curriculum. So students would be tested on what's not being, uh, and not to say that everything is completely different, but there were a lot of standards that had changed in the new curriculum, which the test was going to be based off of. And the first time my students took the test, they did very poorly on it because certainly your exam is on something else that you haven't
mm,
studied. And then I decided I'll throw that out of the window because in any case, if I follow the curriculum, my students will not be tested on it. So I changed my science period into a tinkering workshop. So the last part of my and I had the flexibility of deciding when do I teach science. Between science and social studies, I could decide when do I want to teach that,
mhm,
either the second last period or the last period. So the last period was science, and it was a tinkering workshop. And there were no there was no curriculum, so to speak, except we had to learn about force and motion. But within that, the children could decide, if they wanted to create a, a car with a solar panel, or they wanted to create a scribble machine, or they wanted to build a Rube Goldberg machine. It was up to them, and we only used recyclable products, so cardboard, empty boxes,
mhm,
paper, and and everyone else thought that I was completely crazy to not teach science anymore.
mhm,
But honestly, my students were doing science. They weren't reading or learning science in a traditional way. They were testing hypotheses. They were trying again and again till they got what they wanted
mhm,
to get. And Rube Goldberg machine is a very good example of that. There is a chain reaction, and you continue to tweak, you continue to change, you add elements, you change the elements till you get what you want. But because there's no grade at the end of it, there's no pass or fail, or oh, I'm so disappointed because you did not understand the assignment or you failed it. Children were motivated to constantly reiterate,
mhm,
and they, because those were their own investigations, those were things that they wanted to know more about.
mm,
It wasn't imposed by me. And um, and if, and that, when my students took that same standardized test at the end of the school year, after being in my tinkering workshop for 6 months, they achieved at a 88% as opposed to 42%.
mhm,
Whereas the other two sections of the same class that I was teaching was still at 40%, but my class had really risen up to that higher achievement, not because I was teaching them science based on the new standards, but because they were doing it, because they were living it, and they were choosing their own projects. They had that agency of, this is what I want to know,
mhm.
and nobody was judging them.
That last part, nobody was judging them, matters a lot. And
Absolutely, it
yeah,
matters a lot.
and
Then it's play.
yes, and just to add to what you said, about uh, calling or thinking you were crazy, just know when people say you're crazy, either they don't get it or you are absolutely on the right path. So, so
And it's very scary also when you're the only one doing that.
yeah,
You constantly second
yeah,
guess. You constantly wonder if this was the right thing to do or not.
yeah. Can you, how do I say this? Can you shed a little bit of light on how do you think, if you have examples to share, play-based learning, how do they contribute to the cognitive and social development in the early childhood? Do you,
Mhm.
because I think it's very important to understand this part.
I think one of the first things that comes to my mind when I think about play is fun, interest, sense of control, and power.
Mm-hmm.
I'm the one who has agency. I'm choosing to play,
Mm-hmm.
and play is something where I decide I'm done with it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to move on.
Yeah.
Whereas a lesson or lecture in a classroom is I have no decision
Mm-hmm.
in what I'm learning, how I'm learning it, how long that lecture goes on for, how long the teacher continues to speak, and I just have to pretend to listen and understand. Whereas play is completely self-directed.
True.
So that by itself is the biggest difference. But what is self-directed, you can tweak, you can change, you have control over the outcome. And if you do not like the outcome, you can go back to it.
Mm-hmm.
And because it is not a test, you don't feel defeated. And again, think about all the video games that children play. They want to continue to up their own skills, up their own levels, because it's not an exam that they're taking. They don't have to please anyone else but themselves. They have to compete against what they have set their goals to
Mm-hmm.
be.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the resilience, not seeing, um, being able to, okay, if I did not get the outcome I was hoping for in the play, I will go back to it and I will redo it, but not looking at it as failure,
Mm-hmm.
because that's a big downer.
Mm-hmm.
When you see that I was not able to be successful, you just want to keep trying, because you're the one who's setting the bar. You're the one who's controlling the outcome, or changing the outcome.
Mm-hmm.
I also notice that students who are very high achieving were the ones who were very scared of failure.
So true. So absolutely true.
They
I think-
they were only used to being right,
Right. And I think,
and they were the first ones to give up.
yeah, and I also think, just to add to that is, I think the family also plays into this whole thing. When you have a kid who's really doing well, and you try to push the kid even more, it has a direct impact, because that just adds to the child's nerves. I mean, it's just you're constantly under that pressure.
Mhm. And who are you doing it for? I think that's what it ultimately boils down to. I come from a culture where there are all these expectations on you of how you will do in school, which school will you get into, and what universities am I a qualified candidate to apply. Oh, I study in these Ivy League schools, or my child graduated from this, and now my child is working for these companies. So our markers for success are very superficial.
We both come from a
And
shared culture, Alia, where that's the norm. It's how it is. I mean, I always say,
but you're doing it for others. You're not doing it for
yeah,
yourself. It's these are goals that parents or community or teachers are setting for their children. The students are not setting these goals for themselves. Somebody else is trying to dream for them,
yeah,
which that's a very disembodied life.
yeah. And the crazy push. I use the word crazy very selectively, but the push for science and medicine, and it's just the options. I feel so happy now. Lots and lots. I mean, at least the the team I work with, they're all in their early 20s, and you know they just love to pursue whatever they want to. And I'm like, whoa! I wish I was. Yeah, I mean, I had the freedom and the liberty to choose whatever I wanted to. But I know some of my cousins, some of my friends around me, they really didn't have any option. They just went through that motion of, I have to finish my high school and I need to get into a good engineering school or a good medical school. That's the only way to move forward. It's just and I hope, I'm hopeful of the changes which are happening around us. uh, just to ask you, I hope the questions are really good enough questions, Alia.
Yes. Oh gosh, there are no bad questions.
Thank you. I'm just asking you because I'm having this I hope I'm asking sensible questions, and she's She's happy.
Absolutely, absolutely. And again, coming, I really feel that anytime I do any kind of professional development,
Mm-hmm.
I send a survey. I want to hear directly from the teachers, because if I don't go into their classrooms and understand their context, I have no position of advising them.
Yeah.
I have no idea how they're doing things. How can I come into their in a learning space? Oh, do this, do this, do this. I don't know what they're doing, so I always start. If I can physically, I go and observe their classrooms. It's also just a sliver or a pie or a slice of what their day could be like.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I survey teachers. So I want to hear directly from them. What are some things that they want to work on?
Mm-hmm.
Again, that learner agency. I'm not going to tell you that this is what you need. I want to hear from you. What is it that you want to enhance more? And then I always survey students.
Awesome.
What because these are our stakeholders. We have to hear from students, and we want to know what are some challenges that they're facing,
Mm-hmm.
because we always hear from teachers, but what about students?
Awesome.
What are some things that they wish were done differently?
So true. I mean, if you were,
So your questions
yeah, if you were
have
to
to
speak,
have to come from you.
all right, Alia, we come to the final question um, in the What Matters segment, and this is equity in early childhood education. I guess there exists socioeconomic disparities, and that absolutely affects quality early childhood education. You've been you your experience with the experience you've had teaching in different parts of the world, is there something we can do to bridge this gap? Can something be done at all, or are we going to continue to talk about the haves and the have nots? I mean, what can we do?
I think both will exist. We can have solutions, and we will continue to have that disparity
Mm-hmm.
of of some nature in the future as well. But I think also what we mean by equity, and what mental models are we looking at children from,
Mm-hmm.
because we also, while we generally means when we talk about equity, we often think about economic disparity, children coming from socioeconomic economic backgrounds which are not the same as those children who go to uh, preschool, for instance. There are very few or maybe no preschools for children who live in juggies, or who live in less than desirable circumstances. We cannot look at everybody as like, oh, poor them, they have nothing. They have so much that we can learn from.
Mm-hmm.
These children have incredible interpersonal and self management skills.
Mm-hmm.
They have to fight it out in a very small resource pool,
Mm-hmm.
and they know that they have to advocate for themselves. They are often emotionally more resilient than children who may be growing up in my household where everything is provided for them. So we have to look at them as very capable, strong individuals, and things that we can learn from them. It's not about, oh, what am I going to do to help you and how do I lift you up? They can lift me up as well, and I can learn from them. So that's one of the things I have to put out there. And also, when you're talking about professional development, which is the space that I'm most active in, you have to, again, going back to the design thinking, you have to empathize, you have to do the need assessment, the ground reality. This is what this school or this community, uh, their context is.
Mm-hmm.
And I cannot bring all my Western ideas and my resources and list of things. This is what you need to do to be able to learn
Mm-hmm.
a concept, or I have to work within their context,
Mm-hmm.
within things that are available to them, within things that are part of their environment. For early childhood, we have moved away from these materials that are expensive and made in factories to teach certain skills. We in early childhood world, we really want to focus on real and found materials, or realia, as you may have heard that term. We want children to collect bottle caps and leaves and sticks and things that are part of their environment, and use those as tools for measurement, as moving parts in anything that they're building.
Mm-hmm.
So if you look at the world of resources that each community has access to, I feel that is one of the steps of equity, is using what you already have and building on that, and really leveraging your strengths, and not coming from a deficit model where you're saying, oh, you don't have this, this, and this, so I can't teach you all of these things.
Mm-hmm.
What they have
Mm-hmm.
is untangibly very rich.
Okay.
And again, their language capacity, and I'm not saying academic language, but in their mother tongue, for instance. Many times very young children are taking care of their siblings.
Mm-hmm.
So again, you are just by circumstances put into a role of more responsibility. So they're not only taking care of themselves, they're also taking care of a one or sometimes two younger siblings. So all the skills that are developed, purposefully or inadvertently because of their circumstances, need to be leveraged. And while it is um, a bizarre idea of bringing the communities together, I think a lot can be learned
Mm-hmm.
from that, because they bring their own funds of knowledge
Mm-hmm.
that we need to unpack and um, and start to value. So yes, equity can be built, and of course not in every single aspect, and not to eliminate it to any differences. And differences are good, honestly. We don't want a homogenous world where everybody looks the same, dresses the same, and thinks the same. We want different thinkers. But of course, if you talk about poverty, especially, then of course, resources, funding, all of that become an issue.
Yeah, and I guess when I look at that, it's more to do with the fact that everybody gets a fair shot at whatever they do. Do you have, or can you share some examples of successful programs or initiatives that have made early childhood more accessible and equitable?
So there are many models out there, and so Reggio Emilia approach is one of them for early childhood. It's been considered the gold standard since Second World War. Yet it's not very, very successful out of the community that it was originally conceived in. And people come and visit it, and they try to take it and recreate it. But because the community is different, it doesn't always organically grow and to be
Yeah,
the same.
yeah.
But that is one very successful model. I feel IB, its early years program, or its PYP, primary years program, they do an amazing job of developing certain core competencies and critical skills,
Mm-hmm.
because content can vary.
Mm-hmm.
What I'm learning or teaching in this country may be a little different from what I'm learning and teaching in a different country. However, if I'm able to think critically, problem solve, collaborate, communicate, self manage, then I can apply everything in a different context as well. And that to me is true learning. When you take something and you apply it in a different context, that is a testament that yes, idea or that concept has transferred into my practical life and application.
Mm-hmm. No.
Because just taking things and memorizing them is not learning.
Mhm.
And being able to transfer is um, what constitutes as learning. And these two programs, whether it's an I don't think program is also a very is an accurate term to use to describe them, but Reggio Emilia approach and IB thinking. However, there are so many more
Mm-hmm.
reputable programs, and again, we have to look at the ingredients. What makes them what they are. Being grounded in community is really, really important. Being developmentally appropriate is very important. Adequate teacher training is very important. So all of those things are the ingredients that we need to look for. because there will be more programs that will come up tomorrow and in the next 15 years, which may be better or which would be more comprehensive. But we have to look at what makes them successful and what are the elements that we can take from them so we can build more successful early childhood programs.
Wow. I mean, I really, I love the way you explained the equitable part of the education, especially that there is so much to take away from them. It's not just us. I just loved it.
That's the colonial approach, that these guys do not know anything. I have to come in and save them.
Yeah. Mhm.
There's so much that we know now, that the indigenous cultures have so much to offer, whether you look at India, you look at Palestine, you look at Australia, you look at the Native Americans and First Nation in North America. They had so much wisdom
Mhm.
where their understanding was grounded in nature, in taking care of their environment. Their learnings were really sort of ground beneath their feet. And we just shoved all of that aside and brought this Western way of thinking, which is not always right. To think of what we already have.
Mhm. In fact, it's gotten so ingrained in many of us that we sometimes tend to think that we are actually doing a favor. We are trying to bring everyone out. We can talk about in the what matters segment, but we'll we'll move to the next segment, which is what's brewing. And as the name suggests, just like you brew a fresh cup of coffee, we're talking about what's happening in your world, what's new that's coming up. So that's what what's brewing segment is all about. So are you ready to go into the next segment?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So Alia, we begin the first question from the what's brewing segment, which is you know gender sensitivity in early childhood education, and how do you deconstruct traditional gender roles, especially in early childhood education? And do you think there are some practices which educators can implement to promote gender equity from an early age?
So, books, I would say, is one of the tools
Hmm.
to do that. Uh, the world of stories is a wonderful, wonderful way for children to experience many lives that they have not yet lived.
Hmm.
So they get to see different scenarios. They see characters involved in adventures and problems and emotional struggle, and they work out those difficulties in stories. And providing stories that have a richness of characters and casts. So it's not always the boy who solves the problem. It's not always the girl who fries the egg. It's not always so showing characters doing jobs, living life
Hmm.
as openly as possible. Because as I was saying to you earlier, that what we do is we close the minds of children instead of opening them. They are ready to receive what they see, and if it's a very limited aspect of who we are as a human being and who a man is or who a woman is, if that's the only side of humanity we show to them, that that's what they will think. That's the limit of it. The more we open their world to, and the more kind of stories we expose them to,
Hmm.
they will create a richer understanding of who genders are. In terms of the teachers in the classroom,
Hmm.
are most of the teachers only female teachers? Which is often the case. The caregivers are the only female. Yet, it's my dad who carries a briefcase and goes to work. So all of those things, how are we making sure that they experience a world
Hmm.
that is more inclusive of all genders? And are if you're living in that world, then the children will automatically embrace that world to be a true representation of who does what.
Hmm. I, just a follow up question on this, Alia. Personally, or during the course of you know, um, your teaching experience, professional development, training experience, um, have you encountered resistance to these ideas, especially when they come from different cultural contexts, and if so, how have you navigated through these challenges?
So this is the time where it it's a very sensitive topic in some parts of the world more than the others, but
Hmm.
it's definitely something that we are experiencing across the world.
Hmm.
And for me, it's still a learning space. And I cannot say that I know everything about it. I'm very much a learner in this topic as well.
Hmm.
And I'm learning how to navigate, how to better understand the space, gender identities, by looking at people, by listening to them, and also by examining my own biases that I grew up with or I have absorbed over the years, and challenging those.
Yeah.
So, yes, there will always be resistances, either to this idea as it's evolving or other ideas. And for me, if you take that learner sense that I'm sorry that I offended you, what could I have done differently
Hmm.
to so you did not feel disrespected? I want to be educated. I want to know more so I can be more appropriate in my conversation.
Hmm.
And but again, when it's even in family discussions, I say what I believe in, but at the same time, I know I'm not going to. It's not my job to convert everyone.
Hmm.
Everybody has to do their own growing. I can have an honest conversation with someone and use some of those reflective questions and listening to really understand what they're coming from instead of me trying to push down my ideas on them. I want to understand what are what is their thought process, what are they bringing that makes them more resistant to this idea or more progressive in this idea. So I just need to be open to learning
Okay.
because there will always be different things that I will feel inadequate in, and I would feel I'm falling short of whatever is expected of me. But I'm willing to learn and change.
Mm. I also feel how, tell me how easy or how difficult it is to challenge your own biases.
First of all, to acknowledge that we all have biases. We have to acknowledge that,
Hmm.
know that, because if we say we don't have a bias, then that by itself is a bias.
Yes.
And so that's where the journey starts, is to know that everyone has a bias, and then what is it? What is my bias?
Hmm.
And if we are looking for it, then we will be able um, to identify how we react. What makes us angry when we listen to something, and what about it is making us angry? Is it because it's challenging things that I've always believed in? How am I feeling wronged? So I think just being open to why did I feel that way? Because we're so easy to react and often ready to defend our point of view without thinking, why am I so adamant on this topic?
Hmm.
And just yesterday, I was in a family meeting where there was a discussion about a political system and a political leader, and somebody was in favor of that political leader, and many people were against that political leader. And I was sitting next to the person who was in favor of that leader. And then later on, the other two people said, "You were sitting with a poker face. You didn't seem to emote yet. I know your own political affiliation." And my point was that you cannot convince this person or that person without really understanding where they're coming from and also examining your own biases. And I was meeting her maybe first and the last time. I did not feel the responsibility of converting her because maybe she needed to convert me. I don't know. So just being open uh, is the first step towards
Yeah.
understanding your biases. And some biases that you become aware of really hit you hard because you think of yourself as a very open-minded, very progressive person. But every now and then I realize, oh my goodness, I say all these things, yet in this situation acted exactly opposite to what I stand for,
Yeah.
because it grated against what I grew up with.
And I think sometimes, how about letting people be who they are? Just letting them be who they are. I guess that makes it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. Let's talk about designing learning spaces for young children. Um, and of course, the physical environment does play a very crucial role. Um, what are the key elements of a well-designed learning space for young children? And do you think educators can play a role in, creating environments that can stimulate curiosity and exploring new ideas?
Absolutely, they can.
Mm-hmm.
And if I go back to, say, the Reggio Emilia approach, they are a very good model to look at when you want to research early childhood programs that are successful. And when I say successful, I don't mean in terms of exams or grades, because there's none of that. In terms of the your success index is the happiness and engagement of children,
Mm-hmm.
them feeling valued and seen and heard. That is my success, my criteria for success for a program. So they are developmentally appropriate. So you have to see what a child at age 3 is developmentally capable of, and it's a range. It's not just one thing, but it's a range, and they could be doing that one task at any level of proficiency on that continuum. So what is a child able to do developmentally? So a very easy example of what's being pushed down into early childhood programs is the ability to read and write,
Mm-hmm.
and phonics. Phonics somehow has become this big selling point
Mm-hmm.
for preschools, saying, we will teach your children phonics. Um, it is not developmentally appropriate for a 2.5-year-old or a 3-year-old to be learning phonics. Yes, there may be few children who are ready for it, because again, depending on where they are on that language development continuum, but most children are not developmentally ready.
Mm-hmm.
And schools are expecting the child to come in with phonics knowledge. Certain programs are propping up, mushrooming, claiming that they can teach phonics to your child so they can go to that big desired school.
Mm-hmm.
So again, that's not what Reggio does. They look at child development and what is appropriate for a child to do, which at a young age is exploration of their world, making sense of their world, making connections, starting from me, and then slowly increasing that circle of knowledge to my friends, my school, my teachers, my world, my city.
Mm-hmm.
Not necessarily in that order, but expanding and really grounding it as much in physical and natural environment as possible, because nature is one of our best teachers.
Mm-hmm.
And we who live in cities sort of move away from nature because it's not as easily accessible due to climate conditions. But for children to be able to physically run and play, make their own games, and work and play in nature, because nature, you can collect those found materials that I was talking about. So making real natural objects part of your teaching tools in the classroom.
Mm-hmm.
Again, you talked about how you physically design this space. Again, having it at children's level, open-ended materials where this block can be a um, a cat,
Mm-hmm.
it can be a truck, it can be a mountain,
Mm-hmm.
but a wind up train can only be a wind up train that walks on a set path of tracks.
Mm-hmm.
A puzzle can that has only one outcome, there's only one way of doing it and getting it right, is not an open-ended material. So having open-ended materials, so children are exploring possibilities and different ways of doing things from the get-go. Having a very nurturing environment where teachers are listening
Mm-hmm.
to the students, they're observing, they're conferring about their observation of the students, and saying, okay, this is what I'm seeing happening in the classroom, this is what I see the students being very, very interested in. What other experiences can I bring to enhance that experience, so the students continue to dig deeper and deeper, because most of our education is very surface level. It's a wide mile. It's a mile wide and just an inch deep,
Mhm.
and we want the children to know maybe a little less, but much deeper.
Mhm.
And so allowing them to have that space where they can have their own investigations. If they're building a ramp, adding new interesting materials every day to that space, letting them keep that ramp up for a few days so they can continue to build on it. Because we know we all stand on the shoulders of giants. We don't always start everything from scratch.
Mhm.
We do want to continue to enhance and build. So all of those things, teacher training, very, very important, because many times we are over eager to help our students to get the right answer. We do not always value struggle, because we see our role as people who should help, and struggle has a lot of positive outcomes.
True.
And as long as the struggle is in a playful environment, it is something that children enjoy,
Mhm.
because they see it as a challenge to push through. Language development.
Mhm.
What kind of language are we using with children? Are we speaking for them?
Mhm.
Are we saying, "Oh, I see that. Do you want this? Do you want the red balloon?" Or really asking them to explain what they need? Many times children's needs are met before they even voice them.
Mhm.
So giving them the opportunity to make decisions
Mhm.
and making that part of your curriculum. And that's one good thing about early childhood programs, that they are less under the purview of boards and governments as than the grade schools are, or primary and secondary schools are.
Mhm.
So you have a level of freedom in terms of how you want to teach students, what elements you want to bring into the classroom. Even when you have your standards and your outcomes, you can design your curriculum based on what the children are doing, and all those curriculum areas will be addressed if you teach responsively.
Okay. Do you have any? Can you share any examples of innovative learning spaces you have encountered?
There are many, and again, there's no one right way of doing it. So I would again go back to regius spaces, which again are fluid indoor and outdoor spaces,
Mhm.
and again everyday materials, because we want to sort of demystify school as a completely foreign space where you have these man-made tools as opposed to natural tools, which are part of my environment. I was actually in Calcutta in May in an early childhood program,
Mhm.
working with the teachers and providing professional development. It's an ongoing relationship, and they had an amazing space. They were really an example of bringing the culture into the classroom. Most of their toys were, and when I say toys, I mean manipulative things that children were exploring, whether they were musical instruments, whether they were blocks, or whether they were bowls and rolling pins that were in um, um, the housekeeping area, or if they were brushes and paints. All those things, all their tools were made from coconut, made in Kolkata,
Okay.
and natural colors, not these primary colors, red, blue, and yellow.
Mhm.
They were the color of the wood, or color of the natural material that they were made from. So again, an affirmation of, this is a resource that grows in my area, and
Mhm.
I am using that. The people who were working in the school were again speaking multiple languages: English, Hindi, Bengali. The DVs who were helping were purely speaking Bengali, and again affirming and validating that homeschool connection
Mhm.
with the children. And again, how we reorganize some of the spaces were that it's not a long runway for students, because
Mhm.
if you have this open space and a child, a 3-year-old sees it, all they want to do is run in it.
Mhm.
How do you create these spaces which are intimate spaces? Children love small, tight spaces.
Mhm.
They like to hide under the table. They like to work underneath a small space or inside a box. So how do you create these small intimate spaces? Understanding and valuing the need to be one on one, to be one with, to be working with a material just by yourself, and the need to be with other people, with your playmates, with teachers, where you are collaborating, where you're just sharing materials as well as making decisions together collaboratively.
Hmm.
So it's less of the superficial materials when, and there's so much that goes into it. It's the human element, because one of the things I talk about is, a humanistic design.
Hmm.
We have to recognize us and students as humans with needs, and once we embrace those needs and understand those needs and serve those needs, that's what makes a developmentally appropriate um, program, with, of course, challenging materials, lesson planning that is based on your observations, that is responsive to what you're seeing happening in the classroom.
All right. So, by the way, Calcutta is where I was born and raised.
Oh, wow.
Thank you for another, going back to memory lane. You spoke about the Didi speaking in Bengali, which comes to uh, the next point, which I want to talk to you about is multilingual education, right? So we live in a globalized world, and I think being multilingual is an asset any day. Um, how do you think early childhood educators can support language development, especially in multilingual settings? And part two of the question would be cognitive and social benefits of an early exposure to multiple languages. And can we maximize them in the classroom?
To some extent, we can. And I think, let me ask you, how many languages do you speak?
Uh,
And I'm include the regional languages.
uh, the only international language I speak is English. Otherwise, I speak Hindi, Bengali, um, Malayalam, which is where my parents are originally from, but they moved to Calcutta. I can speak a little bit of Tamil.
Mhm.
So yeah, so those are language I can speak.
And what advantage those do knowing those languages bring to you?
I think for me personally, it's just the joy of learning. I think I come from a country with such a rich culture, different languages. It allows me when, especially, I love to travel a lot, and I feel people love to take foreign vacations. I really want to travel a lot more within my country, and you go a distance and different food. Even the dialect are so different. It's for me. It's more about the joy and you know I just feel really wholesome when I learn something new, especially languages, the food, the culture. For me, that's, I think, enriching myself is probably the most benefit uh,
Mhm.
I feel I have. I mean, just listening to people. I feel when I'm talking to them in a language they that resonates with them, uh, I can see the responses so different on the other side than when you speak in Hindi. You go to a place and you speak in Hindi. Okay, they understand. They'll speak. They respond back to you. But if you speak to them in their language, I think the whole body language changes. The way they host you, the way they talk to you. It just, I think that.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the joy I.
So I so what I'm hearing is joy as well as a sense of belonging,
Yeah,
a sense of connection, because that person sees you um, as part of them, not the other.
yeah.
So these are all the advantages of learning different languages, multiple languages, and in Asia and parts of Europe as well, it's very common for people to speak multiple languages
Hmm.
and not even be aware that I'm constantly switching between Hindi, English, and Bengali. Constantly switching and not being not, and it's not always a conscious process, and but think about all the richness that it brings
Mm-hmm.
to your vocabulary
Sure.
and your understanding, the imagery, the understanding of the world. Because we often say, oh, there's no specific word of a translation for this word in English, for instance, because our understanding of that word is wider than one language can
Yeah.
provide. And it can be the other way around in one of our languages. So just opening up different spaces, social spaces, as well as academic spaces. And world is getting in smaller and smaller that way, that the more languages you speak, the more people you're able to connect with, the more contexts you are able to understand in a deeper level. Because having lived in different countries where I learned the local language, as hard as it was for me at that age, it just opened doors and brought smiles to people's faces. I was a lot more welcome
Mm-hmm.
at their homes because I was trying to speak their language. So that again, that human connection,
Yeah, I mean,
and so very important. And again, you're accessing parts of your brain, you're developing parts of your brain, which has the capacity to do that,
right.
and you can do it. But again, we have to be careful with early learners. Just knowing that it is a great idea for most people, but for some certain children who may struggle with expressive language, it may be too much to expose them to several languages, and limiting language for them
Mhm.
specifically may be a good idea. But again, for most children, it is a good idea to be exposed to different languages, and music, I feel, is the easiest way of doing
Oh,
it.
yeah,
We can
absolutely.
Our brain just picks up lyrics and words and musical rhythms in no matter what language we hear those songs in,
Hmm.
without knowing what they mean. We internalize that, and even if you don't understand at that time what they mean, I think it's definitely something we need to tap into in early childhood.
It's a great connector. And the other thing is, we always expect the other person to take the first step and try to figure out what we are trying to say. How about the other way around? How about me trying to communicate? And it's just I think uh, there's something which I was raised by my grandmom, my nani, for up until I was 14 or 15. One of the things she would always tell me is that the world without any borders. She would always tell me that life is as simple or as complicated as you make it out to be. And she would say, when you walk down the streets, and if you just smile at the person coming from the other end, 99.99% the person will smile back. You keep a straight face, that's the response you're going to get. And she would always tell me
Mhm.
that this is how the world is, as simple and as complex as we make it out to be. Thank you, not just for coming on the show, but just refreshing my memory. Um, uh, an important aspect of anything we do today, uh, technology plays a very important part. I mean, just look at this. You and I are in two different parts of the world, and we can still connect. And we're trying to get as best an experience as possible through communication. Um, but and I started I've been fortunate that I started learning computer when I was probably 13 or 14 years. So not many people would be going to a school that a computer school in those days. But personally, although I've been in technology, I'm a bit wary, actually a lot wary of technology, you know, um, coming in, especially when it comes to early childhood education. I mean, I can understand, we had COVID and people had to, kids had to go to school or had to study. Um, but I guess integrating digital tools at a very early, at the very early learning stage, um, personally, I'm not a big fan of it. I just wanted to understand from you, and I know there's no going back on technology. They play an important role. What's your take on that? How much of technology? I hope I'm able to.
I'm not an expert on that because this is one of those things that everybody would have a different opinion on.
Mhm.
I personally feel, as you do, that technology is here to stay. It will continue to evolve, and it will always be a step ahead. Children would be a step ahead of where we as adults are.
Mhm.
They would know more about technology than we would. So there's no pulling back. It's all about how do you manage it.
Mhm.
And it is part of our lives, everyday lives. I, who's not a digital native, uses technology excessively, and teachers, students were born with technologies, phones, Alexas, smart devices in their world. So this is part of their world, and we cannot take it away. But in a classroom setting, I would really focus more on experiential learning, which is doing by hands, by collecting things, by making sense of the world through it. And so you're actively constructing your knowledge. You're not receiving it, because
Right.
with technology, you're still receiving.
Mhm.
No, I'm not saying it's not interactive. A lot of it is. One of the things that I do is I'm a literacy specialist. So in Amman, Jordan, where I live, I work with this one publishing firm, and one of the jobs that tasks that I did with them was to create their reading assessment tool,
Mhm.
as well as curate a series of leveled books for specific um reading ability levels. So within the range, these are the books that the first grader would be able to read successfully. And again, the range is pretty wide. Some um, first graders may be able to read beyond it, and some not there yet. Um, and then there were these questions after that. And again, this is a completely digital tool, and while it is great on one point, there are definitely downsides to it.
Mhm.
How where every time you remove the human element,
Mhm.
you make things um, less nuanced. They're either right or wrong. There is no option where, out of those four choices that I have on my screen, I can say that I believe a little bit of this is true, but I would really advocate for this.
Mhm.
There is no space
Mhm.
for that, because the program is designed for one right answer, and that is the only right answer, even though what the child is thinking is beyond what that answer allows for, and is higher order thinking,
Mhm. Mhm.
which the computer that is assessing the right or the wrong has the capacity um, to accept. And again, with AI, I'm sure things will change, but where we are at this time, I think it limits. But as opposed to when I'm sitting with a child and we're reading and we're asking questions, I want to hear the opinion of the child.
Sure.
A lot of digital platforms or digital learning tools are not yet ready to receive and assess the open-ended response,
Mhm.
opinion-based response
Mhm.
of the reader, which I think is more important than the right or wrong answer. I don't care if the color of the shirt was green or blue. That's a very low level assessment, and it doesn't make any difference.
True.
What I want to know is, uh, if this happened to you, what would you do in that situation?
Mhm.
That's what I'm more interested in. And is the technology at a place where it can allow for that open-endedness?
Aliya, uh, we are done with the second segment, what's brewing, and we move to the final segment, which is rapid fire questions. They are
I'm not good at thinking very, very fast, so let's see.
well. Let's. I think it's going to be really good, and I'm looking forward to this because I think the questions my team has put together the questions and they seem to be really interesting. And I know that you'll come out with flying colors. I don't know. So within the rapid fire, we have three segments. We begin with the fun and interactive piece, and they're lighthearted. So, and as my team has written, these are lighthearted and designed to bring Alia's personality, preferences, and experiences in a playful, joyful way. So
Okay.
that's okay. If you could teach a class on anything other than education, what would it be?
I think everything is education. It's just how you look at it. But I would look at the current issues. I would look at what's happening, and again, because I live in Jordan, something that is a constant reminder is what's happening in Palestine right now.
Hmm.
And so I would start with that, and say, okay, what is the truth? Whose news are you listening to? Who do you empathize with? And why do you believe that uh, that is the right perspective? What perspective is missing here? Who are we not hearing? Whose story is missing in that? So that's what I would like to engage in, to really bring multiple perspectives, the first-hand perspective of people from opposing points of view, and really learn from that. And to me, that is real education, where you're able to listen and analyze and sift through information, because we are bombarded with news, real or fake or somewhere in between. And we have to develop our capacity to be able to, as a consumer, to be able to decide, how can be a responsible consumer of knowledge or of skills of news. So I would take anything that is from our real world and analyze it. And again, the students, the children, the learners are the ones who will decide how they want to analyze it. I will just ask a few questions to make sure that we're really going deep, and that we're covering all perspectives, and we're looking at it from areas that we may not have considered.
Wonderful. I think we have normalized the idea of not having a constructive conversation. That when you bring up that let's have a constructive conversation, it'll the reactions seem to be like, what are you talking about? Because we've started normalizing conversations where there's one person talking and somebody just has to go through it, the motions. So
And that emotional regulation that we talk about, that social emotional growth that we need to build in preschool, so when you're my age, you are able to to self manage.
true, true. Okay, what's the most memorable thing a student has ever said to you?
So it's something very funny, and one of the things, my one of my students asked me was, "So, Miss Jaffrey, when you started teaching, did you really want to do it, or just are you doing it for the money?"
Hmm.
I just thought it was the funniest question, because I don't think teachers anywhere in the world make money.
Yeah,
But I just thought it was a very fun question to receive from a
yeah.
student.
Well, if you could instantly master one new skill, what would it be?
So I constantly feel that my technology skills are always lagging behind.
Mm.
Um, and while I could master those, I I'm more interested in learning about research in education.
Hmm.
So really, it's not as much as of a new skill, but honing the skills that I currently have, which include rethinking, reevaluating. I think that for me is the key of being a good um, educator learner, where you are open to new ideas and ready to absorb. And it doesn't have to be any one thing, but for me, just being able to relearn and reevaluate.
Wonderful. Um, what's your go-to activity when you need a break from everything?
So, several. I go for a walk.
Hmm.
I have recently taken up some crocheting, because that I have to do stuff with my hands. So while I'm not fidgety as much, but I really need to engage with my hands for my brain to engage or relax. Yoga is another thing that I go to: walk, yoga, reading. Three things that I would really help to disconnect and regroup and go into a different world.
Do you like board games? Do you like board games?
I do like board games, but my children tell me that I'm a terrible board game player because I'm not competitive enough, and it's no fun in beating me because I don't care about losing. So while I do enjoy them, I'm told I'm no fun to play with.
If you could have lunch with any educator, past or present, who would it be and why?
I would have lunch with this very dear friend of my mother's,
Hmm.
who I see as the embodiment of lifelong learning. And she is a historian as well as a literature teacher, and she lives in Pakistan. And every time I speak to her, I just feel my brain, areas of my brain activating that probably have never been activated before. And it's just not her knowledge that inspires me. It's the way she communicates, the beauty of her language, the simplicity of her language,
Yes. Yes.
and the accessibility of the complex ideas that she brings to you.
Yeah.
Is what I would love to bring more and more into my life. And her name is Arifa Sayyida.
Awesome. If you were a children's book character, who would you be?
I would sometimes be Amelia Bedelia because sometimes I can be a little literal minded. Sometimes I would be Curious George because I'm always curious about
That's my
what
favorite.
would happen if I did
Curious,
that.
Curious George is my favorite.
And I love it when you push boundaries and you get a little bit into trouble for that, but that's when you also grow the most.
So, Calvin and Hobbes is another interesting book I love. It's people think it's a children's book, but there's a lot of philosophy behind how Calvin communicates. All right, we go to the second segment of the rapid fire, thought provoking. I'll keep it short because we've already had a lot of thought provoking questions. How would you define success in education?
I put a lot of value in joy of learning,
Mhm.
and the success criteria are my students or the learners, whoever we are engaging with. If they are engaged fully and immersed in it, and they are happy because the classroom is buzzing with discovery of ideas and the desire to do more, then that's a successful learning environment. Having said that, I also know that not everything can be fun the entire time,
Mhm.
and there is a very important space for struggle, as important space for failure, and some things you just have to, you know, buckle down and know. It's like your times tables. Yes, you have to have your conceptual understanding, but some of the things you just have to know how to do.
Mhm.
But success is really the fluidity and the fluency with which a classroom is buzzing. A learning space cannot be a quiet space.
The learning space cannot be a quiet place. That is so.
Of course, you need thinking time and you need quieter spaces and more active spaces. But we put so much value on a quiet classroom and noise and be quiet. Whereas if you're talking about 21st century skills, it requires discussion. It needs ideas to be bounced off and refined. And unless we discuss them and look at it from uh, this friend's perspective or that person's disagreement, we cannot chisel our ideas, and they cannot always get refined to the same degree in our own minds in the same amount of time as they can through an active discussion.
Okay. Um, if I were to ask you this question, what has been the biggest lessons your students have taught you?
Mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
Mistakes are very important to make.
Mm-hmm.
And I know in my life, every time I have judged anyone for the mistake they have made,
Mm-hmm.
within a very short span of time, I make the exact same mistake. And it just is a constant reminder that we're all learning, we all make mistakes, and mistakes are your opportunities
Mm-hmm.
to grow and not things to be punished for. So I used to have a sign in my classroom saying, "This is a space where mistakes are made and celebrated."
I want to ask you this. So I know you probably grew up more in a very traditional school where
Mhm.
you probably we you can't be as much open with your teachers like the way your students can reach out to you. But and this is not a part of the question, but I just wanted to ask you: has there been someone who inspired you when you were growing up that you want to be a teacher? Did any of your teacher inspire you?
Many teachers inspired me, but the teacher that always um, comes to my mind when I think about schooling is my preschool teacher. And it was all the fun that she brought to learning, all the songs, all the games that we played. That for me is the most joyful time. And of course, I had many teachers who were very good teachers and left a lasting impression on me. But it's really my preschool teacher who always comes to my mind when I think about my early teachers. And that's also why the early childhood environment, that nurturing, that community building, that sense of belonging is so critical, because you will always remember that.
Ali, I'm so happy you mentioned preschool, because at the end of the day, what really happens is we just don't give enough credit, enough respect to preschool and our early educators. I mean, it's just we come from that culture, and it doesn't matter whether the so-called developed or developing. I think it's the same even in the US. It's the same everywhere. We just I think
Absolutely.
fail to give the kind of respect they deserve. I mean, forget everything else. I mean, that's there, but because I think apart from your home, they are the teachers, the building blocks, I would say, really helps. Thank you for sharing that. Um,
As a society, we put our money in what we value.
yeah,
And if you're putting no money in early childhood programs, that tells us that as a country, as a world, as a continent, we do not value this.
yeah, yeah. I think if I were to say this, and I don't know, but if I can say this loud, but I think the whole education system across the globe, I sometimes feel that we tend to create programs or curriculums or whatever based on how we want and not what is needed for the kids if you really want to create more responsible citizens around the world. And I know this is a little, I think my team has romanticized the question, but if you had unlimited resources, what would your dream classroom look like?
So my dream classroom would be an open classroom where I would have indoor learning spaces, but the outdoor learning space would be really maximized
Uh-huh.
in terms of access into nature, not manicured nature, so not a park that's been maintained by people, but actually nature reserves and creeks, places that children can go and get their hands dirty, investigate the soil, the water, look at the leaves, their patterns, play in the playground, sand. And lots of books, lots and lots of books, lots of field trips. Again, experiential learning. What I can bring into the environment, great. If I cannot bring that into the environment, I'll take the students to that.
Mhm.
Going to a post office, even though people do not use post offices the same way they used to. Going to a supermarket, to a doctor's office, to normalize things and to also bridge that gap between the real world that we are always preparing our students for, that they actually live in every day, because there's such a disconnect between the school and the real world.
Oh, it's just so true. Um, so as we were talking, we both come from a very shared culture when it comes to many of things, food, festivals and everything. Um, and so our education system is very traditional, and innovation is happening. How do you balance the both?
I'm always a big proponent of a balanced approach, because that way you can pick and choose
Mhm.
the elements that you like. And if you stick to either of the extremes, it's very hard to stay current with changing times.
What are the
Um,
challenges? What are the challenges?
so if
Balance.
if you're only traditional, then you are not bringing in the new thought, the new research. You're teaching children the way you were taught. If I'm 40 years old or 50 years old, I'm still carrying that model of teaching into my classroom. Things have uh, not evolved yet. The children are not the same as what I was when I was in preschool. Their world has expanded tremendously. Our child's world has expanded. Yet I'm constantly trying to limit, constantly trying to um, minimize their experience. And if I'm only going towards progressive, which excludes tradition, excludes that oral rich tradition of storytelling, or your clothes, your festivities, all of that, then I'm also leaving out a very integral part of my identity. This is who I am. I'm not just one thing. I'm a complex individual that carries my languages, my food, my cultural identity, my festivals, and my way of being and doing. And I'm integrating the technology, the latest research, the way to engage with material. So I feel that the balanced approach is really a good way of moving forward.
Awesome. Um, Now we move to the third segment of the rapid fire question. This is the final segment of the final segment. And this is this or that. And here it comes: group projects or individual assignments?
I would say both, because we are not just one. Uh, uh, we don't have just one way of showing our strengths, and we all prefer to do this at one time and that at the other time. So I will not choose one over the other.
All right.
I would let the child decide.
Uh-huh. Morning classes or afternoon classes?
I'm a morning person, so for myself, morning classes.
Okay. Recess or story time?
Choice.
Books or podcasts?
For me, books.
I thought you would say podcast. Okay, that's fine.
I'm a big consumer of podcasts, but my books are my happy place.
That's okay. It's good.
I'm trying to catch up with the modern world.
Yeah. Okay.
So I'll get there one day. I promise you.
Okay. Arts class or science class?
I don't like to draw borders. I think art class and science class can be integrated, but I'm more artsy. So at this time, I'm feeling more arts.
Okay. Hands-on activities or discussion-based learning?
Hands-on.
Small class sizes or large collaborative groups?
If you have enough support to facilitate those large collaborative groups into smaller groups, then the latter, otherwise small class size.
Wonderful. And the final one, teaching in classroom or coaching teachers?
Coaching teachers. And this is after teaching in classrooms for 17 years. You have to do the work of being in the trenches to be able to coach. You have to know the challenges of being in the classroom. That is what prepares you to be a more successful coach. But at this time of my life, coaching, because it's about maximizing the impact.
Wonderful. I mean, 10 on 10 if we were to grade the rapid fire question segment. Thank you so much, Aliya. I think, and with that, we come to the end of the final segment. Before we wrap up this episode, I have a couple of questions for you. What do you think is going fine with the current global education system? And what do you think can be improved?
There's a lot that's going well. And if any education system is able to really help facilitate developing the skills to critically look at something, to be able to take positions, to be able to problem solve, because my focus is not the content, but skill development and task facilitation. Then our education system is serving our students to certain degrees. Again, an example I would use is, again, in the context of occupied Palestine right now. And this is a personal, example from personal experience. My daughter just graduated from a university in the US, and her own school put a lot of restrictions on freedom of speech, even though they are a big proponent of dismantling the systems of oppression and raising your voice against inequity. But when it came to the students voicing their own dissatisfaction with the support of the university was aligned, who it was aligned with, they tried to crush that voice. And on one hand, we often are dismissive of the current generation who are growing into young professionals and our young adults, saying that they're not ambitious enough, they are not focused enough, they've had it too easy, they are not able to, they live in a mental health crises mode, they're not as resilient. Yet these students raise their voices against their own institutions,
Mm-hmm.
and at the risk of being expelled or their degrees being revoked, being jailed, being subject to police brutality, which happened. All of that happened at my daughter's school. Yet they still stood with what they thought was the
Yeah.
right side to align with.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if you can do that after receiving an education at any institution, challenge the person for their beliefs and hold them accountable, then your education has served you.
Mm-hmm.
Because again, it's not about the content, it's the application of what you have learned and what are you doing with that knowledge. How are you applying it in your real life, and how are you positioning yourself and staying with what you think is true to your integrity. So yes, the education system is serving us. It can do better. There's lots of room for growth, and I think it's very individual based.
Mm-hmm.
So we cannot say this country needs better schools. Of course, we can say that, but within each country, there are amazing schools.
Mm-hmm.
And within amazing and well developed countries, there are terrible schools. So we cannot generalize across countries or across schools. Even within amazing schools, there are terrible educators, and pardon me for using such strong words. And in very basic schools, there are incredible educators. So it really boils down to that, to the individual will, passion, training, all of that. So while the education system lacks a lot, there are a lot of positives as well.
Sure. And I think, for me personally, I feel that um, education becoming more inclusive, and I think putting in more resources um, in public schools where majority of kids can go. And I also feel that it's not just the job of a government. I think it's a public-private partnership which can really fuel growth. If it can work in other industries, I mean, why not education? Which is what uh, you know. So I think that's my takeaway. Alia, thank you so much. I am very grateful and honored to have you. And I wish and I'm hoping we can do more of these conversations because I've not asked. It's 20, 30 pages. I wish I had that time to ask you. So I have to answer my team why I didn't ask these questions. Thank you so much.
It's also because none of my questions were straightforward answers.
Yeah.
I always, they're abstract. I wish I could say give a formula, but there are no formulas
No,
for this.
but there are no formulas as such, So thank you so very much for your time. I'm grateful. I'm honored, and education has, for me, when we spoke the first time around, I shared with you. For me, education, healthcare, climate, uh, these are not just important issues. And, you know, this is what will make us, who we will be tomorrow. And this podcast is just an extension of what I truly believe in. So I really, really am grateful that I have such wonderful people who have come on the show. I've never really had to seek them. One guest gives me reference of another guest, and this just वो कहते हैं ना कारवा बनता गया. It's just happening.
Yeah,
And we
exactly. Yes.
completed a year. I can't imagine. A year and a half back, I decided to, that I've had enough of my corporate world. I've had enough of being an entrepreneur. And I said, I want to do this full time. And I started this. And I'm so glad whatever we have achieved, whatever we are doing because we believe in it and not because somebody else is asking us to do it. So thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure to be with you, Santosh.
Aliya, thank you so much once again for your time. And to everyone out there who has been listening to this podcast, do tune in to Pangea, which is an initiative from Aliya. And whether you are a parent, whether you are an educator, whether you are a student, um, I think the only way uh, to bring a difference or to make a difference is by getting involved yourself. Uh, and this episode has been a part of our educational series. We've had a podcast episode on gifted children. We are coming up with our next episode on special needs, and I think please do tune into that. And I always say this that we all tell stories, but the most important story is the one we tell ourselves. And how we tell those stories shape who we are. So please keep telling yourself those honest, authentic stories, and I'm sure we'll all come together to make this a better place. Do subscribe to our YouTube channel, our Instagram, and LinkedIn. We'll keep updating you about new episodes and new content. And as always, stay safe, stay healthy.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Between Us podcast. This podcast was recorded at Manikpot Studios in Chembur, Mumbai. Our sound engineer is Moinak Chakraborty. The producer is Santosh Kumar, and the associate producer is Samyak Kamble. The video for this episode was processed at Viewfinder's Edit. The Between Us podcast uploads episodes weekly, and we'll see you next time.